And we are back. We are back for another edition of Black Tower Radio. I'm your host, Jake Fox, and we are broadcasting live on 1040 AM, 92.1 FM, WYSL in Rochester, New York. Also on World News Radio .today. That's World News Radio .today. Every Wednesday, right here, from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. And we are joined here today by Rob Kirby of KirbyAnalytics.com. Kirby Analytics is a proprietary macroeconomic research site. He's got a really cool newsletter. I read it, and it's very informative. Rob is a very, very smart guy, and he's just over the lake from me in Toronto. We used to have a fast ferry from Rochester to Toronto, but that went kaput like every other promising idea that seems to come out of Rochester. But that's another subject for another radio show. But welcome to the show, Rob.
A pleasure to be with you, Jake.
So, yeah, we were talking off air about how you thought that just as the geopolitical situation in the world is turning dark, so is the economic and market situation worldwide turning dark. And I wanted you, I want the listeners to hear you go deeper into that. So what exactly is happening there, Rob?
Well, I believe, Jake, that our global financial banking edifice is effectively teetering on a brink. And people in circles that I communicate in believe that there is a global financial reset coming at some point in the relatively near future. And I think it could be literally any day. And it seems to me that as the global financial picture has turned extremely dark, the geopolitical landscape has been seemingly, to me anyway, it's been molded to coincide with, I'm going to suggest, a possible either a collapse or a complete restructuring of our global financial edifice, which will be ultimately the cause of it is global central banking, a topic which is near and dear to my heart. And isn't it interesting that or at least in my view, that when this financial collapse or major reset occurs, it seems very likely to me that we might have this exactly timed with a much larger conflict, whether it's involving Korea or whether it's involving Russia in the Middle East or whether it's involving Korea and China, at which point I believe the global central banking community will then try to conveniently have the rest of us lumpen believe that the financial collapse was not the result of too much money printing, too much interference in our markets, but really the result of evil people on foreign shores who had it in for humanity, and they're going to try and explain to us that their interference and their malfeasance in our capital markets had nothing to do with this. And I say that coming from a point that living in Toronto, Canada, we have experienced in the last 5 years an unprecedented, I'm going to call it a crack-up boom in real estate prices, where real estate prices have like in the last year alone, it was reported yesterday here in Toronto that real estate prices are up 33% year over year, and I mean this is compounded on upward rates of appreciation of double digits for the past 5 years here in Toronto. It's become a national commentary in Canada about the price of real estate in Toronto, and the politicians and the bankers seem to be getting extremely concerned that these price rises in real estate are not sustainable and might end actually badly with a collapse in prices. But I find the commentary surrounding the event very interesting in that the bankers and the politicians want to blame. They want to blame policies. They want to blame lack of supply. But they don't want to touch or broach the subject that they've made money basically free. And when you make money free, people will borrow excessive amounts of money, and it's low interest rates, at least in my view, that have led to the speculation, because to me that's what we have, is we have a speculator's market, and the reason we have a speculator's market in real estate in Toronto is because we have interest rates at zero. It's the same sort of effect if you put a big bowl of candy in a daycare for kids. You'll have a lot of kids all hopped up on candy because you take the governors off and you allow kids to make decisions for themselves, and that's what you end up with. And when you have interest rates at zero, you end up with wild speculations, and that's one of the unintended consequences of governments and central banking intervening in our markets and creating, let's just say, unnatural outcomes. Interest rates should not be at zero, should have never gone to zero, but here we are at zero, and now we're living with the consequences of them doing it.
Yeah, I have a friend who is an analyst for Canadian Tire, and he lives in Toronto. And we've been talking about the looming Canadian housing bubble for the last 7 years, and it hasn't popped. And he's just as worried as you are, and talking about it. But back to the geopolitical. The whole the landscape of the world, and how it fits economically. You think that we're going to have some sort of financial calamity based on, I'd assume, multiple bubbles popping, and they're going to blame it on a series of international bad actors. And when I say they, the United States government and I don't know. It's client businesses.
Jake, to cut to the chase, the world for the past, like in the last financial crisis that we had in the 2008, 2007, 2008 time frame, we had an issue, at least in my view, that whole calamity was touched off by subprime mortgages being rated and packaged and rated as AAA by ratings agencies, and then distributed basically throughout the global financial system. And this supposed AAA paper failed, and it marked the first time in the history of capital markets that a AAA credit failed, and that. Because a AAA credit failed, it caused a credit freeze, where our capital markets and our commercial paper markets froze up. And a capitalist society requires a freely trading commercial paper market to function, because it solves the timing issues between when someone produces something to when somebody consumes something. That's all facilitated in the credit markets through the commercial paper. And when AAA credit failed for the first time in the history of humanity, people no longer realized or no longer trusted the label AAA, because AAA is supposed to be like AAA is not supposed to ever fail. It never had failed before. So people became very leery of lending money to anyone in the 2008 timeframe because everyone was afraid if they lent someone money, they could fail like the next day, or they could fail overnight. And like how creditworthy was any institution or anyone if AAA was starting to fail? So, in response to the credit markets freezing, it was going to be the end of capitalism if this situation was allowed to continue. And so the bright lights at the Federal Reserve, in conjunction with the U.S. Treasury, had the brainwave that they would do electroshock therapy to the interest rate markets, and they would force and make interest rates plunge to zero, hoping that it would unfreeze the logjam in the commercial paper markets and make people willing to take risk again. And it kind of worked, but the distortions that it created by using, and what they did is they used interest rate derivatives because the banks were captive to the U.S. Treasury, with the Federal Reserve serving as broker to the U.S. Treasury, and the Treasury, and specifically a branch of the Treasury called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, that has wealth that's off book, that's beyond anybody's wildest imagination, and they entered into these interest rate derivative contracts using the New York Federal Reserve Trading Desk as their broker, with 5 big commercial banks in America, being Citibank, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Bank of America. And they conducted literally tens of trillions of dollars worth of these interest rate derivatives, which made the banks captive buyers of trillions of dollars worth of U.S. government debt. And this is what forced interest rates to zero. This is also what made LIBOR appear to be broken. And this is something that was conveniently, in the aftermath, blamed on banks. And it was, effectively banks had nothing to do with LIBOR being broken at all. LIBOR having the appearance of being broken had everything to do with the U.S. Treasury intervening in the interest rate derivative market, making banks captive buyers of U.S. T-bills, driving their rates to zero. And that's exactly what they did. But you see, as I said earlier, this basically, or metaphorically, had the same impact as putting a huge bowl of candy on the table in a daycare. And because what's happened is people have started to pig out and get and gorge on, let's just say, interest-free loans. And what that causes is a whole pile of malinvestment. Just like when kids have too much sugar, they start bouncing off the walls, and some of them, and if it continues for too long, some of them end up with diabetes at a very young age. And I would suggest to you that our economy is now suffering from a diabetic condition. And our global economy is now suffering from a diabetic condition that's been brought on by interest rates at unnatural rates. And in the case of a lot of jurisdictions in Europe, we have negative interest rates. Just think about that. Negative interest rates. You take a risk and give your money to a government, to a spendthrift government, with the promise that down the road they will repay you less. Our world is upside down. Our world is beyond upside down, and, it's not sustainable. And it's going to crash because you can't impose a structure or an edifice that is this unstable and have it continue indefinitely. So, to me, this is why the powers that be And the globalists have positioned us for calamity on the geopolitical stage, because the financial system is literally clinging to a ledge in a very high place. And when it falls and when it crashes, they'll take us to war. And they'll blame the war on the crash. Plain and simple. And people who think that I'm sounding silly, this has been done by the elites throughout history. I mean, this is what happens. This has been going on for hundreds of years. And people who are real students of conflicts going back through the millennia will go back centuries, and people know, and people who are learned scholars who study these things realize that when the economy crashes, we go to war. So that's where we're headed. I don't like it, but I take comfort in understanding why we are where we are, and what's likely to come out of all this. And frankly, to me, what's likely to come out of it is I do think we will get a real estate crash at some point, because I think we're going to get a global reset in the financial system. Credit will become relatively unavailable relative to what it is today, and my guess is that fiat currencies will fail. I think we're very likely to probably see something of a hyperinflationary event occur in the relatively near future. And I think that people that own physical precious metals probably stand to do better relative to people who don't have any. You might want to own some food, some storable food, and if you're going to be involved in real estate, in my view, the best way to be involved in it outside of your principal residence would be to probably own some productive agricultural land. So that's where my head's at, and that's what I think. And you know what? It won't take long, in my view, to watch events play out probably over the next few weeks or a few months, because I think that's the direction we're headed in.
So, with Trump's agenda, whatever he wanted to do, I know he had a big infrastructure plan, $1 trillion infrastructure plan. We've had guests on in the past who said, infrastructure and lowering taxes, that could, really salvage our economy and get us back on the right track.
Well, you know what, Jake? Trump and his agenda are like a man standing in front of a tsunami, and Trump's agenda is going to get picked up and carried with the tsunami. And frankly, I think we're already seeing signs of that. I believe the events of the last week are just the thin edge of the wedge of that occurring.
So, I mean, essentially what I'm hearing from you is, Trump's agenda is about to be completely put I guess if we're going to make a horror movie analogy, we're going to put the pitchfork in his back and finish him off for good, and World War III is coming.
Well, I think it's highly likely that we're going to see the rise of militarism. I would like to think and hope and pray that we don't denigrate into all-out nuclear war. Mind you, knowing that globalists still control the reins of power in the world, the whole globalist movement is based in eugenics. The whole globalist movement and the key personnel in the globalist movement are on record having written white papers over the last 50, 60 years stating that the ideal population for the world is 500 million people instead of the 7 billion that it is today, which means, core to their beliefs, 6.5 billion of us should, and probably, if they have it their way, will perish. Unfortunately for all of us, that would be very consistent with the notion that we might have nuclear war. Because these globalists are also on record saying and thinking that they can retreat to bunkers and, basically survive a nuclear war. So it's a pretty dark thought to contemplate. But, the people that are in control of our power structure are on record stating these views. You can choose to ignore it if you so wish. But these things are out there. You can Google them. They are open source. You can go read them.
So do you think this these eugenics ideas that these elites hold, do you think that's part of their long plan? I mean, included?
Of course it's part of their long plan, Jake. That's why we have GMO food. That's why we have GMO food. Listen, GMO food was sold to people. I don't really know the exact rationale. I think it was something about it gave us better yields in crops. That's nothing to do with it. There have been tests done where they take a rat and they feed it GMO corn for like 90 days, and which is like 3 generations. And at the end of 90 days, the rat is completely infertile. It sterilizes. That's what GMO foods are all about, reducing birth rates. And isn't it funny? The Western world, for the most part, have declining birth rates. You can blame it on whatever you want. And look at the results that's brought on us all. We have aging populations. We're not replacing ourselves with young, and which has put into peril all of our social safety nets and structures, because we don't have young people coming into the workforce to replace the old people that are retiring and taking their benefits that they paid into for so long. And then that causes the knee-jerk reaction of immigration, the gates being opened, and the dropping, basically the effect of dropping of borders. I mean, these things all flow from and into one another, and they're all linked. And people who don't understand the linkages between what's going on geopolitically and financially on a geofinancial basis, have their heads buried in the sand or somewhere else that's dark.
The scenario you just painted a picture of reminds me of that movie Children of Men, where everyone's sterile. There hasn't been a human baby born in like 17 years or something. Everyone's constantly at war. There's just a whole lot of chaos going on, and it kind of looks like what that movie was born out of. Yeah. The early, if you went back 17 years before the movie, within the movie's timeline, it might look like what we're dealing with today.
Well, you know what, Jake? I can take it a little even another step further. That there has been a voice, and there has been a voice, and probably the biggest voice in the world against the GMO regime has been Vladimir Putin, who's outlawed it in Russia. And isn't it interesting? He's been painted as the evil dog who's going to destroy humanity. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing? And it's also you can draw parallels. You can draw parallels in the financial world, where the Western central banks belong to a club. The club is headed by an institution called the Bank for International Settlements, or the BIS. The BIS is headquartered in Basel, Switzerland. It was formed in 1929. It's called the Central Bank of Central Banks. And members of the BIS structure include just about every Western every Western country in the world. And the exceptions to the institutions being members of the BIS over the years have been the Central Bank of Russia, the Central Bank of Iran, the Central Bank of Iraq, the Central Bank of Venezuela. Am I painting a picture here? Can anyone connect those dots? All the countries that get bombed into submission aren't members of the club. Is it that difficult to grasp that notion? I ask the question. I mean, to me, it's a slap in the face. And when somebody's slapping you in the face that hard, if you can't feel the sting, you might as well just turn out the lights and go back to sleep.
Yeah,
anyway, these events are all connected, and I just like to make the point. And I like to connect dots, and I like to be aware of what's going on around me, and I believe that there's power in knowledge, and I want to be informed. So I try to do my homework.
Well, you're certainly a great guest, Rob, and you bring a load of interesting information and analysis to our listening audience, and we appreciate that. But when talking about Russia and all of those banks that aren't a member of the Basel, Switzerland Central Bank, Putin practices economic nationalism. It's pretty much you cooperate, you do things for Russia or else. And I mean, while I wouldn't want to operate under a system quite like that, I do admire his economic nationalism, and I wish we had that here, but we don't.
Well, I think in all honesty, Jake, I actually believe that Donald Trump is a nationalist. But I want to go back to the analogy I made a little bit earlier. I think Donald Trump has realized that he's been swept up in something that's a lot bigger than him or his agenda. So that's the conundrum that he's in. So I think he's going to have to surf this tsunami, and he knows it's bigger than him and his agenda, and he's dealing with reality.
Yeah, he did a complete 180 policy-wise.
Well, let's just say, the events of the past week are so inconsistent with everything he campaigned on. It has to make one wonder. And I mean, try to explain or give me a context in which the events of the last week make sense. Because I'm hard pressed to do so without adopting a view pretty much as I just laid out.
Yeah, campaign trail Trump would come out against this Syrian gas attack and talk about how the media got it wrong when there was the last gas attack and they.
But listen, Jake. But back up a little bit. The campaign Trump wouldn't have the people around him that he's been forced into accepting around him right now. I mean, Trump had how many people did Trump offer the job as National Security Advisor to after Flynn was pitched out? He asked 3 people to take that position, and they all said no. Because informed, intelligent people, don't want to be anywhere near the wheelhouse, of the Titanic. Because things are not good. And, and people who are good and who have good reputations, don't want to hitch their names to a losing cause. And I hate this. Look, I do not like thinking in dark terms, but I'll be damned if I will, candy coat what I see in front of me, or candy coat the slap in the face that I see, and call it something that it isn't. This is where we're at. This is our reality. And my advice to people is to start dealing with it and getting real about it and trying as best you can to prepare for it.
Rob, real quick before you left, because this has been something this has been on my mind for a while. A lot of market analysts will say that we really can't handle much in terms of interest rates hikes. We just can't afford it. At what point will it become unsustainable? 2-3 points. What do you?
Listen, Jake, and it's a bigger issue than not being able to handle a few interest rate hikes. People can't handle the truth. It's a famous line from a famous movie. But people can't handle the truth. And very few people want to speak it. And if you can't handle the truth, what makes you believe for a minute that people are going to be able to handle a few interest rate hikes? People don't even want to accept the truth as to how interest rates got to zero. Think about that.
Yeah, we're in a very weird time where the public at large doesn't really know what's going on, and it seems the powers that be are in a panic mode because they.
You know what, Jake? We live in a time when the average person is so consumed with covering their day-to-day expenses, paying their mortgage, getting their kids to daycare, putting food on the table, and managing the debt, the awesome debt that they already have. And just think about it. That's all with rates at zero. How are people going to deal with it all when rates, if as and when rates go up 3, 4, 5, 600 basis points?
Yeah.
Anyway, and if you think that story ends well, turn out the lights and go back to sleep, as I said earlier.
If you were going to name one trigger, Rob, if you were going to name one domino that just kind of kicks out the legs of all the other pillars holding up this house of cards, what would you say it would be?
Well, listen, the evidence to it is everywhere. The world, if you haven't been paying attention, the world has been de-dollarizing. America's three biggest financiers in the last 30, 40, 50 years have been Japan, China, and Saudi Arabia. And they have, and understand, they have been the biggest buyers of U.S. government debt. The American government continues to issue an additional $1 trillion of new debt every year for the past 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, 10 years. We're basically on tracking at $1 trillion a year. And China, Saudi Arabia, and Japan in the last 20 months have reduced their net. Not only are they not buying any of the new debt, they're getting rid of some of their old debt. And who's going to buy the debt? Who's been buying the debt already? Okay, so what I'm saying is that the world's been de-dollarizing. Countries like Iran, China, Russia have been doing bilateral trade deals or trade agreements with countries where they no longer transact things like crude oil in dollars. The demand for dollars is lessening, and the supply is growing exponentially. And that is another thing that is just not sustainable, and that really is what's at the core of what's going to force a reset, because the world can't absorb the dollars that are being created. There's no home for them. And as far as I'm concerned, they've been getting memory hold now for quite some time. And this institution in the U.S. Treasury that I refer to as the Exchange Stabilization Fund, with their vast amounts of dark dollars, off-book dollars, in my view, they've been buying those bonds and they've been memory holding them. They're just disappearing into the ether. And that is something that just won't stand. Not indefinitely. So I think we're on the threshold of this all blowing up. So you know what? Hey, if we haven't blown up in another 6 or 9 months, you can just call me a silly fool if you wish.
What does?
But that's where we're headed.
What does blowing up exactly look like for our economy?
If you want to know what blowing up is, I would suggest you go to your computer and you Google life conditions in Venezuela, and you will be able to read stories and see pictures of people who formerly were solid middle-class people who are now rummaging through dumpsters looking for their next meal.
Whew.
That's what blowing up is.
Yeah, I don't want to be living around that for sure. I mean that's like, gutting public services,
okay. Well,
everything.
That's where we're headed. That's the trajectory we are on right now. And that is reality.
Rob Kirby, I would like to thank you very much for coming on the show today. We very much enjoyed all of your analysis, all of your thoughts. Go to KirbyAnalytics.com. That's KirbyAnalytics.com. And it is a proprietary macroeconomics research site with a great newsletter. I highly suggest you sign up for that. Also, Rob, I'd like to give you the floor to plug any current project you have coming up or any thoughts you would like to give out. Go for it.
You know what? My advice to people, think for yourself, educate yourself, and prepare as best you can. And you know what? You can only do your best, and after you've done your best, try to take comfort in what you've got, the family you have, and good luck. Good luck to everybody. That's what I say. I think we're going to need some good luck. I think we're going to need some, and I wish it for everybody. So.
Well, thank you very much, Rob, for coming on. And if we're not digging out of garbage cans in the next 9 months, I'd love to have you back on and talk.
And it would be my pleasure. So.
Thank you, Rob. Have a good day.
You too. Take care, Jake.
So that was Rob Kirby of KirbyAnalytics.com. Coming up next is Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer with some news and notes about what's going on with the Syria strikes, what's going on within the Trump administration, He has a lot of connections inside the Trump administration. He was very good friends with General Mike Flynn. So we are going to get his take on a number of things. So stay tuned for that. We will be right back with Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer. Stay right there.